Linfred of Stinchcombe. If you're looking for the first Potter, forget the castle drama for a second. This story starts in the countryside with a local legend who was always pottering about. Linfred of Stinchcombe lived in the 12th century in the West Country of England, and he's the earliest confirmed Potter ancestor we can actually point to with confidence. He wasn't a lord, a minister, or some dramatic pureblood aristocrat. He was a village wizard with a weirdly practical superpower, fixing people. To muggles around him, Linfred looked suspicious. He kept disappearing. He knew too much. He showed up with remedies that worked a little too well, so the locals gave him a nickname that was meant to be insulting, the Potterer, basically implying he was always pottering about, meddling, and being generally magical in a way they couldn't explain. But here's the twist. Linfred turned suspicion and endless whispers into something far more dangerous than dark magic, fortune. He became known for creating potions and herbal cures that were genuinely effective. This matters because it sets the tone for the entire Potter line. The family's success doesn't start with status, it starts with skill. So when people later act like the Potter fortune came out of nowhere, no, it began with Linfred, a wizard healer who got called a nosy weirdo by muggles, and quietly launched one of the most important bloodlines in the entire wizarding world. So yes, Linfred started the Potter legacy, but what came next made it legendary. The Peverell connection. Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus Peverell lived in the 13th century and are immortalized in the tale of the three brothers. Legend says death gifted them 3 objects of unimaginable power. Historically, they were likely master wizards who created them. Antioch possessed the Elder Wand, Cadmus owned the Resurrection Stone, and Ignotus carried the Cloak of Invisibility. But here's the detail that matters for the Potter bloodline. Unlike his brothers, Ignotus did not die violently or tragically. He lived a full life, passed the cloak down to his son, and established a legacy built not on domination, but on wisdom and survival. Over generations, the Peverell name faded. The artifacts became heirlooms rather than symbols. The Elder Wand passed through bloodshed. The Resurrection Stone disappeared into secrecy. But the cloak endured. Ignotus Peverell's lineage eventually produced a descendant named Iolanthe Peverell. Unlike her famous ancestor, Iolanthe did not become the subject of legend or folklore. She became something far more important to the future of the wizarding world, a bridge. She inherited the Cloak of Invisibility and was raised with the understanding that its true origin must remain a secret. The Deathly Hallows were not bedtime stories in her household, they were history. And when the time came, the Peverell bloodline didn't vanish, it merged, because Iolanthe Peverell married Hardwin Potter. Hardwin Potter was the eldest son of the Potter line at the time, a direct descendant of Linfred of Stinchcombe, and heir to the growing Potter fortune. Unlike the dramatic figures of the Peverell legend, Hardwin is not remembered for duels or artifacts. He represents something else, consolidation. By marrying Iolanthe Peverell, Hardwin brought the Cloak of Invisibility into the Potter family. From that moment forward, the cloak was no longer simply a Peverell heirloom. It became a Potter inheritance, passed from parent to child in secrecy for centuries. What makes this union important is subtle but powerful. The Potters were already financially stable due to Linfred's potion legacy. The Peverells carried mythic magical significance. Together, they formed a line that had both material security and legendary magic. Hardwin and Iolanthe ensured the cloak story remained hidden. The Hallows were not publicized. No one advertised their connection to Ignotus. The power stayed quiet, controlled, private. And that quiet decision reshaped wizarding history, because centuries later, when a boy named Harry Potter would receive an old invisibility cloak at Hogwarts, he wouldn't just be holding a useful magical object, he would be holding the last surviving Deathly Hallow. But before we reach that point, the Potter line continues through the next generation, one far less documented, yet still essential: Abraham Potter. Very little is recorded about Abraham Potter in established canon. His name appears in extended Potter genealogies, but there are no detailed accounts of his life, achievements, or political involvement. What can be reasonably inferred is this: he lived between the Hardwin-Peverell merger and the later, better documented Potters like Henry and Fleamont. So yes, Abraham's chapter is quiet, but the next Potter on our list would publicly oppose the ministry itself. Henry Potter. Known affectionately as Harry within his family, Henry lived in the late 19th and early 20th century and served on the Wizen Gamut, the highest wizarding court in Britain. That alone marks a shift. The Potters weren't power-hungry aristocrats, but they were respected enough to hold serious authority, and Henry used that position boldly. During a period of growing tension between the magical and Muggle worlds, Henry publicly criticized the Ministry of Magic for its stance on Muggle relations. At one point, he condemned then Minister for Magic, Archer Evermond, for forbidding magical aid to Muggles during a major crisis. Henry believed wizards had a moral responsibility to help, even if it risked exposure. That was controversial. So controversial, in fact, that when the Sacred 28 list was published, the registry that defined which families were considered pureblood, the Potters were excluded, not because they weren't pureblood by lineage, but because they were seen as too pro-Muggle. This is critical to understanding the family identity. The Potters could have leaned into exclusivity and status. Instead, they aligned themselves with empathy over elitism. Henry's stance set a precedent that echoes generations later in James Potter and Harry himself, siding with the marginalized even when it costs reputation. Henry married and had a son, Fleamont Potter, ensuring the line continued, but more importantly, he solidified something intangible: the Potter moral compass. Fleamont Potter. Born in the late 19th century, Fleamont inherited not only the family name, but also the entrepreneurial spirit that traced all the way back to Linfred, and he used it brilliantly. Fleamont was the inventor of Sleekeazy's hair potion, a revolutionary magical hair product that quickly became a massive commercial success. In a wizarding world where appearance, status, and presentation matter deeply, especially in elite social circles, this potion exploded in popularity. Long story short, he built an empire. Fleamont quadrupled the existing Potter fortune before selling the company at a huge profit. But Fleamont's story isn't only about money. He married Euphemia Potter, and for years they struggled to have children. They were older than most wizarding parents by the time their only son was born, a son they adored, protected, and perhaps indulged. The boy grew up in a household free of blood supremacist ideology. The Potters had long rejected the Sacred 28 mentality. They valued ability, loyalty, and courage over purity. Wealth was never treated as status, it was simply security. And that environment shaped him more than any fortune ever could. Tragically, Fleamont and Euphemia both contracted dragonpox and died shortly before the rise of Voldemort's First War reached its peak. Their deaths meant their son inherited the entire Potter estate at a young age, including the gold, the properties, and the invisibility cloak. Now, if you're asking, who was their son? Well, it was James Potter. Yes, Harry's father. But before we move on to one of the most controversial Potters, James Potter, there are two names that quietly complicate the family tree: Charlus Potter and Doria Black, one of the most rigid pureblood supremacist families in Britain. Yet her name appears on the Black family tapestry beside a Potter. That alone is striking. The exact position of Charlus within the wider Potter line isn't explicitly confirmed in canon, though he's widely believed to have been a relative of Fleamont's generation. What matters is the symbolism. A Black married a Potter. At a time when the Black family increasingly embraced blood purity ideology, the Potters were known for their tolerance and pro-Muggle stance. Charlus and Doria had one son, and their branch fades from central history. But the message lingers. Long before Sirius rebelled, a Black had already crossed the line. James Potter. The only son of Fleamont and Euphemia Potter, James grew up deeply loved and financially secure. He attended Hogwarts in the 1970s, was sorted into Gryffindor, and quickly became known for brilliance, arrogance, and raw magical talent. Alongside Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, he formed the Marauders, and helped create the Marauders Map, one of the most sophisticated magical artifacts ever made by students. James wasn't just gifted, he was powerful. He became an animagus at just 15, illegally transforming into a stag to support Remus during his werewolf transformations. That alone shows extraordinary skill and loyalty. But James's legacy is complicated. In his early years, he bullied Severus Snape and flaunted his privilege. However, he matured. By his final Hogwarts years, he had grown into someone capable of leadership, sacrifice, and restraint. Lily Evans, who once despised him, saw that growth and eventually married him. When Voldemort rose to power, James didn't hide behind wealth or status. He joined the Order of the Phoenix and actively fought against the Death Eaters. He and Lily went into hiding under the Fidelius charm, trusting Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper, a decision that would prove fatal. On October 31st, 1981, Voldemort entered their home in Godric's Hollow. James faced him wandless. He told Lily to run. He stood between Voldemort and his family with no chance of winning, and he died buying seconds. Seconds that allowed Lily to make the ultimate sacrifice. Harry Potter. Born on July 31st, 1980, Harry inherited more than a name. He inherited the invisibility cloak of Ignotus Peverell, the moral defiance of Harry Potter, the wealth of Fleamont, and the courage of James. But unlike his ancestors, Harry grew up without comfort, raised by the Dursleys in neglect and emotional isolation. That contrast shaped him. At Hogwarts, Harry quickly proved he wasn't famous by accident. He became the youngest Seeker in a century, mastered complex defensive magic far beyond his age, and repeatedly faced Voldemort long before he was fully trained. But what truly set him apart wasn't power, it was choice. Again and again, Harry chose self-sacrifice over dominance. He rejected the Resurrection Stone's temptation. He surrendered himself in the Forbidden Forest to destroy the Horcrux within him. He refused to use the Elder Wand for conquest. In fact, he repaired his own wand and returned the Elder Wand to Dumbledore's tomb, breaking the cycle of violent power that had followed it for centuries. That decision mirrors Ignotus Peverell's philosophy. Accept mortality, don't try to master death. After the war, Harry became an Auror and later head of the Auror office, helping reform the ministry from within. He married Ginny Weasley and built the stable family life he never had. And together they did something none of the previous Potters ever truly experienced. They raised children in peace. They had 3, and with them the Potter story entered its next chapter. James Sirius Potter. James Sirius Potter, the eldest child of Harry Potter and Ginny Weasley, carries a name forged in rebellion and loyalty. Named after James Potter and Sirius Black, 2 marauders who defied fear with reckless courage. He represents the unapologetic Gryffindor spirit reborn in peacetime. When we see him in the epilogue, he is already confident, teasing his younger brother before boarding the Hogwarts Express, comfortable in both his identity and his legacy. Unlike his grandfather, he is not born into war. Unlike his father, he is not raised in neglect or prophecy. He grows up loved, protected, and fully aware of the sacrifices that secured his future. James Sirius does not need to fight to prove himself. Yet the weight of his name reminds him that bravery is not optional in the Potter line. It is inherited, expected, and quietly carried forward into peace. Albus Severus Potter. Albus Severus Potter carries perhaps the most symbolically charged name in modern wizarding history, named after Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape. 2 men bound by sacrifice, secrecy, and redemption. His identity represents reconciliation between former enemies. Unlike previous Potters, Albus does not fit comfortably within tradition. His sorting into Slytherin quietly fractures a long-standing Gryffindor pattern, proving that legacy does not dictate destiny. Growing up as the son of a living legend brings pressure he cannot escape. He understands that the wizarding world expects greatness, yet his story is not about replicating heroism, it's about redefining it. If James Sirius represents continuity, Albus Severus represents evolution. Through him, the Potter line expands beyond house identity and inherited expectation. He stands as living proof that courage is not confined to one banner, it can wear green and silver too. Lily Luna Potter. Lily Luna Potter, the youngest of the three, embodies memory without burden. Named after Lily Potter and Luna Lovegood, she carries both sacrifice and individuality within her identity. Unlike the generations before her, Lily grows up untouched by war. There is no Dark Lord rising in secret, no prophecy shaping her childhood. For the first time in centuries, a Potter child approaches Hogwarts simply as a student. That shift alone is monumental. She inherits the invisibility cloak, the family vault, and the legacy of sacrifice. Yet she is not defined by survival. She is defined by stability. From Linfred's potion work to Ignotus's wisdom, from Fleamont's fortune to Harry's walk into the Forbidden Forest, every decision led here. Lily Luna represents the quiet victory of the entire Potter bloodline, and for the first time, that victory is peace. But peace is not what Harry Potter is about. All 6 Wizarding Wars in Harry Potter Explained. That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before the prophecy gets misinterpreted again.